today's lesson, we're going to be talking about World War I. We're going to talk about what started it and what caused other countries to get involved, and why the United States changed from being neutral to getting involved in the fight. Stay safe. Chapter 23 is about World War I. The past couple lessons, I've done 2 or 3 videos per chapter, but we're running out of time. So I'm going to move a little bit faster. We're going to do the entire chapter today, and I'm only going to focus on the most important parts of it. So, President Wilson, before he became president, was the governor of New Jersey. He had a lot of success, and he was able to fight some corruption and basically get his state going in the right direction. He was also very good at getting Congress to do what he wanted. So a lot of people think the president makes the laws. He does not. He signs them once they're finished, but Wilson was very good at getting Congress to work on the tasks he was focused on. He created the Federal Reserve, which is a system to introduce money into our economy. And the 17th Amendment was passed during this time. And it made it so there was direct election of the senators by the people of their states. So Wilson does a lot of things. He accomplishes quite a bit in not a lot of time. So conflict is brewing in Europe. There was lots of conflict and competition over resources, and people are fighting over who actually owns which part of the countries. So property and the maps have changed time after time. So if you look at a map today and you see where the borders of countries are, that's not how it's always been. Those borders have changed over time depending on who's in charge. Some countries wanted to get back part of their land they'd lost from before, and some smaller countries also want to become independent. So if you think about when this class started, we wanted to become independent of Great Britain because they were no longer representing us. Some smaller countries are wanting that same thing from the countries that control them. So 2 of the main countries are going to be Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Italy's going to play a smaller role, but they're going to be a major player in this too. So Austria-Hungary is going to be the important one for what events are about to happen. So a place called Bosnia was part of Austria-Hungary. But the people of Bosnia do not want to be part of that country. They don't have that much in common with them, and they feel like they're not being represented. They don't feel like they're part of Austria-Hungary. They want to be part of Serbia, which is a neighboring country. They have much more in common with them. So there was talks about a rebellion, about them coming and fighting back against the country that controls them and separating, similar to how we did. So what happens? The leader of Austria-Hungary sends his nephew, Archduke Francis Ferdinand, to go there and try to squash this. His job is to go calm this down and get everything under control, put everybody, in the right state of mind to move forward peacefully. So as he's going on his visit to try to keep the peace, there's a parade going through the streets, and someone from Bosnia recognizes him, and they end up throwing a bomb at Archduke Francis Ferdinand's car. The bomb explodes, but it doesn't kill Francis Ferdinand. It injures some people who are in the vehicle behind him. So hours later, Francis Ferdinand, the nephew, ends up feeling bad about these people who got injured, and he goes to visit them. On his way to the hospital to go and check on them, his car slows down, and a man named Gavrilo Princip sees him and recognizes him. Gavrilo Princip pulls out a pistol and shoots and kills Archduke Francis Ferdinand and his wife. So the leader of Austria-Hungary is furious. He sent his nephew there to try to work things out peacefully, and his nephew was killed. So he blames Serbia for killing his nephew. So after his nephew dies, they end up declaring war on their neighboring country. When Austria-Hungary declares war, it starts a chain reaction. So you think about when a fight breaks out, it doesn't usually stay between one or two people. Russia decides they're going to jump in and help Serbia defend itself. Germany decides to help Austria defend itself against Russia. France agrees to help Russia and they plan to attack Germany. Germany then declares war on France, and since Belgium is in the way, they march through them too. So since Belgium got caught in the middle of this, France and Great Britain declare war on Germany. So what happened? All because this guy's nephew got killed. That was the thing that ignited this. That's the thing that started this big event that's going to become World War I. So it starts off really just being between two countries, and more people get involved, and it causes this giant chain reaction. So by August 14th, 1914, there's 7 different countries at war. And the two teams are split up. The Central Powers are Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria. The Allied Powers are Great Britain, France, Serbia, Belgium, and Russia. You see, we are not involved in this conflict yet. Japan supports the Allies in hope of, getting something out of it. They aren't going to get involved in the fighting, but they're going to pick a team to support, hoping to benefit from it. Italy remains neutral at the beginning of the war, and it's eventually going to break that neutrality. This war spreads through most of Europe and into parts of Africa and Asia. So it starts off as a small conflict and grows very quickly. So President Wilson sees all of this fighting going on, and he says, we're not going to get involved. We're going to stay neutral. But he does decide that we are going to sell weapons to the countries who are fighting. Germany accused the United States of not remaining neutral because we're selling weapons to everybody, but we're giving our friends some better deals. The British Navy and the German Navy both set up these things called war zones because they're not going to want us to give weapons to their enemies. So if they saw we were making a delivery to Germany, the British people would attack that ship. If Germany saw we were making a delivery to Great Britain, they would attack that ship. Neither one of us wants them to arm the enemy. Germany has some new technology. They have these boats called submarines. And the submarines are boats that could go underwater, and they could shoot out torpedoes and sink our boats without us even knowing. We'd have no idea what was coming because there wasn't really radar technology to detect these submarines yet. So the president starts to get upset. He says that nobody owns the ocean and we should be able to sell weapons to whoever we choose. The Central Powers appear to be winning, and a lot of people are getting worried because most of our friends are on the other team. Some people want us to get involved in this war, but a large part of the country does not want us to get involved in the fight. So what happens next? There's an incident involving a boat called the Lusitania. So the Lusitania was a passenger ship, which means it carries people. It's traveling from New York to England. So this boat is supposed to be just carrying people. Once it gets close to England, Germany fires a torpedo and they blow up this boat that is carrying people, carrying citizens. Out of the 1,200 people that died, 128 of them were Americans. So we became furious when we heard about this. Many Americans were shocked. Some people, including Theodore Roosevelt, said that we should declare war on Germany. President Wilson sent a letter to Germany basically telling them they were wrong. Germany said, no, we weren't. We blew up that boat because it was carrying weapons to our enemy. Great Britain denies that there were any weapons hidden on that boat. So basically, Germany thinks that this passenger boat had a supply of weapons hidden on it, and they were using the humans, or using the passengers, as a shield. So the sinking of the Lusitania turns a lot of American people against Germany, and it's starting to get harder and harder to see how we can stay out of this. Germany is winning this war, but they know if we join it, it could change the tide of it. So Germany says, you know what, we're going to be more careful. They're not going to blow up ships without some kind of warning first. And they promise they're not going to let something like this happen again. So Woodrow Wilson, president, runs for re-election. And here you can see a picture of the Lusitania as it sinks after being hit by a German torpedo. A lot of people like Woodrow Wilson because he kept us out of the war. This is a terrible war, killing tons of people, and we've stayed out of it. Wilson wins the election, and it was very close. So after being reelected, President Wilson gives a speech. He says he wants the war to end, and he wants peace without victory. So what that means is he wants the war to be over, and he doesn't want either side to win or lose. Because if you think about a fight, a loser always wants a rematch. They want a second chance. He says this war needs to be over, no winners, no losers, because he does not want this conflict to start again. So it's looking like the war is coming to a standstill. All of a sudden, Germany announces that they're going to start sinking any boats that come close to their territory or they suspect are selling weapons. They know this is going to upset us, but they think they are so close to the war, or so close to winning, that they will win this war before we could do anything about it. So Germany starts attacking our ships again. Things are getting more and more tense, and it's getting closer to us joining the war. Many people still want us to stay out. They do not want us to get involved in a conflict that initially had nothing to do with us. One of the final straws is a letter called the Zimmermann Note. And the Zimmermann Note was a letter from Germany asking Mexico to attack us. They said if Mexico attacked us, Germany would make sure that they would get Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona returned to them. And that is land that we fought and bought from Mexico. So, April 2nd, Woodrow Wilson asks Congress to declare war. Now, the president cannot just decide we're going to war. He's got to get Congress to vote on it. He says America would fight for peace and justice, and he says the world must be made safe. So on April 6th, Congress declares that the United States is at war. We are no longer neutral. Right here, you can see Woodrow Wilson giving a speech. He's trying to convince the country and convince the people that the war needs to end with peace without victory. He wants nobody to win, nobody to lose. Because if somebody loses, he knows that's going to plant the seeds which will cause another conflict down the road. So factories during this time started to change. A lot of the factories stopped making consumer goods, which means they stopped making regular stuff for regular people, and they switched to making war supplies. People start working extra hours trying to get the United States ready for this war. Many women joined in the workforce, replacing the men who'd gone off to war. So these factories were full of women making supplies for the war. What happened is many young white men joined the army, and since they were joining the army, there were lots of vacant jobs, and the women filled those jobs, and many African Americans also moved north to fill these factory jobs too. So these jobs paid a lot better than most of the other jobs, but there's going to be some problems with it. Racism is still a major issue in the United States, and when these African American men started working in the factories, many people in the factories did not want to work with them. They were afraid they would work for less money, they would drive their wages down, and riots broke out because of these factories becoming integrated. So, war is not cheap, and the government has to do lots of things to raise money for this war. They sell bonds, they raise taxes, and they ask the United States, or they ask the Americans, to limit their use of certain supplies. So they're basically asking people to not buy as much stuff, not use as much stuff. We also need to increase the size of our military. The United States uses something called the Selective Service Act, which has a draft which will call men to join the army. So if you got called, you would have to show up and you would have to serve in the army. So these aren't all willing participants. These are some people who got called and it was their duty to go and fight for the country. So this war was fought differently than a lot of other wars. American soldiers entered a war that was stuck at a standstill. And it's going to be a gruesome, bloody war because of new technology. One way they fought was they would stand in these ditches called trenches. And they might have to hide in these trenches for days at a time. And it would be dangerous to go out to get fresh air. It'd be dangerous to leave to go to the bathroom even. These trenches were nasty, they were dirty, they were cold, they were not a pleasant place to be. A lot of soldiers are going to die from sickness and illness from being stuck in these trenches. There's new guns capable of rapid fire, firing off hundreds of rounds per minute. They finally start using airplanes as weapons during this war. And there's going to be poison gas, mustard gas, that is used. And they would set off these big mustard gas bombs. And the mustard gas would get into the trench and you'd have to leave because it would burn your lungs, it would burn your eyes and burn your skin. But a lot of times the mustard gas would backfire because if the wind blows, you can't really control which way it's going to push the mustard gas. So in this image you can see two German soldiers and their donkey all wearing gas masks. And in this image, you can see soldiers wearing gas masks operating a machine gun. So how does this war come to an end then? After several battles, the United States forces are just too much for the weakened German army, and the Germans realize they cannot win the war. They ask for an armistice, which is basically a timeout to discuss peace. They met at a place in France. This war became known as the Great War, and eventually it's going to become World War I. It lasted more than 4 years, and many people were eager for this war to be over. So they ended up signing a treaty on the 11th day, the 11th hour, the 11th month, November 11th, 1918, agreeing that this war was over. Now that this war was over, a lot of countries in Europe were weakened, and the United States increased its credibility and its power because of how we have participated in this war. So Wilson knows that if the country is going to remain at peace, this treaty has to be fair to everybody. So if you think about there being a fight between two kids, and one kid gets suspended and gets charges pressed against them, even though both kids played the exact same part in this fight, one person is going to be really upset about that, and they're not going to be ready to let it go. Wilson knows you have to make this fair, or else there's a good chance the fight could start again. He had a plan called his 14 points. So part of his plan was no more secret treaties. He says any country was free to sail the ocean. Nobody owns the oceans. He says everybody's going to make their army smaller. If you have a smaller army, you're less likely to start a fight. They're going to redraw the map. and a group called the League of Nations would be created, and the League of Nations would settle arguments between countries and hopefully stop a war from happening. So they have a meeting at the Palace of Versailles in France. They want to write this treaty and make it fair for everybody. President Wilson decides to go to this meeting, and this is a big deal because no president before him had left the country while he was in office. He wanted to make sure his League of Nations became part of the treaty. 3 other leaders were there: David Lloyd George of Great Britain, George Clemenceau of France, and Vittorio Orlando of Italy. They became known as the Big Four, and Germany was not invited to this peace treaty until after everything was written. So they were one of the major countries involved in this war, and they were not invited to put their 2 cents in. It's not going to be a good situation if you got involved in that fight between the students, and every kid gets called in to explain what happened, except you never get a chance to tell your side of the story. You're going to be really upset if you end up being the one who catches all the blame. So the Treaty of Versailles changes the map of Europe. Austria-Hungary is going to be broken up into many smaller countries. It was made into Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. And Bosnia became part of Yugoslavia. So if you look at this map, here is Austria. So Austria-Hungary, before the war, this is all their territory. After the war is over, this is their territory. So you can see they ended up losing quite a bit. You can also see right here, Germany owns this chunk, and then after the war, that chunk is no longer theirs. So those countries lost big portions of their territory. So President Wilson does not have a lot of faith in this treaty, but he agrees to it in hopes that the League of Nations will be able to sort it all out later. This treaty ends up causing some problems because it blames Germany for starting the war. They had to pay back most of the damages of the war. So that would be like in my class. Let's say one day that there's a riot. Desks are getting thrown, my computer gets broke, and you throw a pencil, and the pencil hits me in the back of the head, and you're the one who gets caught. And they decide you have to pay for all of the damages to the room, replace the computer, pay for my emotional damages and my counseling, and fix all the supplies in my room. You're going to be really upset with that because you don't think that is fair considering what part you played. Germany doesn't think that it's fair that they have to pay all of these damages, but they were on the losing side of the war, so they don't have very much power to negotiate. Germany was also no longer allowed to have an army. Since they had no other choice, they signed the treaty. And this is going to be one of the things that's going to lead to World War II. So according to the Constitution, the Senate must approve all treaties. So the president can't just go sign a treaty without the Senate agreeing to it. The Republican senators do not like the idea of the League of Nations because they think if we put our nose into other people's business trying to keep the peace, it could actually get us pulled into more fights. So many of them think we would be better off just to stay out of other people's business. So people want the president to go back and change the treaty and remove his League of Nations, but President Wilson says he's not going to remove it. He thinks it's an important part in maintaining world peace. President Wilson is a popular guy, and he thinks the people will be on his side. So he travels around the country trying to convince the American citizens that the treaty is necessary, that the League of Nations is vital to keeping world peace. And everywhere he goes, people cheer, and they are very excited to listen to him speak. But He's unable to change the Republicans' minds, and the treaty doesn't get signed. Then something happens. Woodrow Wilson becomes ill. He cancels the rest of his tour. And he disappears from the public. No one sees him for weeks and weeks and weeks. Now, they did not know, the public didn't know, and many people involved in our government didn't know that Woodrow Wilson had a stroke. His wife and his doctor were really the only ones who knew. And his wife did not want it to be known that he had a stroke because he might be removed from office. His reputation would be tarnished, and she didn't want that to happen. So his wife, Edith Wilson, actually was doing much of his work for him. He never fully recovers from his stroke. He's eventually able to get his ability to walk and talk, but he's got to use a cane, and it's never the same. Everything takes much more effort for him after a stroke, and he gets tired much more easily. So he's unable to change the Senate's mind, and the Senate votes against signing the treaty. This was the first time in American history that the United States had voted against the treaty. The United States also does not join the League of Nations. Without the United States as a member, the League of Nations was weak and it was pretty ineffective. So that would be like if you are planning a party at your house, you call all the people up, and then at the last minute you find out you can't go to your own party because you get grounded. Your party's not going to be very successful. Woodrow Wilson's idea was the League of Nations, and he was unable to even take part in it. And without the guy who planned it being in charge, it doesn't have very much success. So this treaty does not make the peace that was intended. And it's going to start something brewing that will become World War II.